Hello, my name is Lindsay Handy, and this is my AEP 800 Module 5 assignment, Barriers to the Web 2.0. Our first portion of this assignment was to give summary of the articles that we read. The first two articles I read were Barriers to Using Web 2.0 in the 21st Century Schools and 7 Common Barriers that Obstruct Tech Adoption in Education. Both of these articles discussed the various barriers that we face when it comes to technology in our classrooms. These were extremely applicable to me, specifically because I teach in a Title I school, and the families that I serve just don't have access to technology, and that was a lot what was talked about in these articles. The next article was The Digital Divide, a quarter of the nation is without broadband. In this article, it discussed how many people, specifically people that live in rural areas, have little to no access to internet, which to me was a little shocking just to think that the day and age that we live in, that not everyone has access to it. I've never lived in a rural area, so I can't relate. But I do remember years ago when I was young having to rely on like dial-up internet and how unreliable that was. And so it kind of discussed that digital divide and what they go through. And then finally, the last article I read was about open education resources, which was just really refreshing and exciting to read about. It was just about sharing free educational resources for teachers, which as a teacher I'm extremely thankful for and excited about. The first question that we were supposed to reflect on was, do you feel the digital divide can be resolved? Why or why not? In my opinion, unfortunately, I do not think that this digital divide will ever fully be resolved. I think that there are a lot of barriers that we can overcome with a lot of work. But ultimately, the biggest issue when it comes to the digital divide, in my opinion, is poverty. And ending poverty seems impossible, and therefore, in my opinion, ending or resolving the digital divide is also impossible. I've always worked with impacted students, and just to see it firsthand and what exactly that means, not just for the students in our building, but for their families. Um, it just in my opinion is it's not feasible. I think that as teachers and leaders in buildings, there's a lot that we can do and that we try to do to make sure that these kiddos have technology in their hands every single day. But ultimately, the divide happens when they don't have that access at home, and they may not ever have full access to it like others do. The next question was, what skill set do you feel 21st century students must acquire prior to graduation? There are lots. A few that I mentioned were to be able to communicate with others. I think that that's almost like social skills, but so many of our students lack that, and that's huge for just interacting with people in the real world, in jobs, um, understanding how to have to talk about differences, um, interviewing, just having that communication ability. Another one would be collaborating with others. So it kind of is also a social skill. Not only do you need to know how to communicate with them, but actually collaborate, work as a team. That's a huge skill that people look for when they're looking for uh, jobs, and what they think that you must have in order to be a good worker. Whether it be working in a Burger King or a grocery store or working as a teacher, you need to be able to collaborate with your teammates. I think it's also critical for them to be able to problem solve. So many of our students, we give them exemplar after exemplar, and so they already have this visual of what is expected in their head, rather than here's the problem, solve it. I'm big into to PBL, is problem-based learning, and I think the kids love it, number one, and number two, it really gives them a chance to actually be creative and solve problems without having it laid out for them. Also, I think that motivation is huge, and having that intrinsic motivation, not always do it because you're going to get a prize or do it because you're going to get paid. Just actually be motivated yourself to get things done. And finally, flexibility. Working with kids in the building that I serve, they're all very trauma impacted, and so flexibility is something that is very difficult for them. But with like the constant learning and change that's happening in the world every single day, especially with technology, our students need to be flexible. They need to be able to adapt to change, and they need to be able to consistently learn new strategies and skills to be successful. What impact does the global economy have on your personal use of the internet? So I have two lives here as a teacher. I think that it's impacted the way that we train and we learn. So much of it happens online now. We collaborate with other teachers in different districts and different states. So that's huge. In my classroom specifically, with iPads, getting the students their hands actually on these technology items and learning to use them, and then me learning to teach them to use them. And finally, teacher resources, like we mentioned, the open resource things from that final article, as well as like Teachers Pay Teachers, other teachers helping us with resources for our classroom. So those are all wonderful things that I can use in my teacher life. And then as far as personal life goes, education as well, like currently right now, we're all taking these classes online, as well as online shopping, such as Amazon. And then finally, social media, interacting with colleagues and groups of people and family, versus via different social media sites, whether that be like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, just those different forms. What technology training do you still need to effectively integrate technology in your current position? So much. I do not feel that I'm by any means technology fluent or technological. um, but specifically, kind of how to implement it in my classroom or my building to create a more rigorous learning experience. So when I say that, I mean not changing an iPad to do the exact same thing that a book per se would do. So don't say, here, this is an iPad, go ahead and read this story. No, let's figure out a way to integrate more learning. So maybe record yourself reading the book and listen to it. Find those blends, find those digraphs in your reading. So I do that currently, but I'd love to like know more ways to use technology as a resource rather than just as a, changing out of something that we already currently have, excuse me. The other thing I'd like to get better trained on isn't Google. So like Google Drive, Google Slide. I mean, this class particularly has given me a lot of practice with it, but I don't really have a lot of experience or education when it comes to Google. And so I'd love some more training on that. And finally, iPad apps and resources. Unfortunately, the main technology that I have use of in my classroom due to funding are iPads. We have 12 iPads in our class that we can use amongst our 25 students. And I would love just more information on what apps are, applicable and age appropriate, and those types of things. Is your school or district equipped with 21st century technology? I teach for Denver Public Schools, and so as a district, I would say yes, there are many buildings that are extremely technologically advanced and can put out some amazing things. Their students can with technology. My building in particular, we do have some technology. We have smart boards, but they hardly ever work. I've been asking for the smartboard pen for my room for the last 2 years and haven't received one. So, that kind of goes to show how much it's actually used. We do have iPads in the lower grades, K1, and then we have Chromebooks in second through fifth grade. And then teachers have ancient Dell laptops. So when you don't have technology that's compatible, it's like, well, how, relevant is it? I personally use my own Mac in the classroom because the Dell just isn't functional. So yes, we have technology, but in schools like mine that are extremely impacted by poverty, I feel like my district pushes more like brick and mortar, like teach them to math, teach them to read, rather than don't waste the time on the things like technology and like integration. So it's unfortunate. What are the advantages of innovative practices in schools? I think there are so many, but just to name a few, getting students ready for the real world. They're going to be interacting with technology in the real world. They're going to be doing these innovative things. And so if we explain it to them and show it to them and have them use it in schools, we're setting them up for success. Also, you have so much more buy-in, participation. It's more interesting for them, so they want to be a part of it. When I have students writing in class, I always have to like bribe them practically. But the other day I told them after we get their writing done, they're going to have a chance to publish it in their technology block. And it was amazing the amount of writing that came out of these students. And finally, it's actually some relevant teaching. We're teaching things that kids like, that kids need to know, and that kids want to know. Of course, there are disadvantages as well, excuse me. Number one is time. Like I mentioned, being a teacher in a impacted school, we have more pressure to teach them to read and write rather than teach them to integrate technology. And so, with a little bit of extra time that we have left in the day, very seldom do we get to, really teach them how to use technology, how to type, how to navigate a mouse, things that kids don't necessarily learn how to do unless they're exposed to it at home. The next thing is dependency on technology. So, we don't want kids to be completely dependent on it. We want them to still be able to write with a pencil and pen. We want them to still be able to do research if technology is down, if there isn't any internet. We want them to know how to open a book and find information. And so that's a huge disadvantage that I could see. Finally, funding, of course, it's extremely expensive. When things break, it's really expensive to fix. Training teachers on technology, training them on the things that change is extremely expensive. And finally, trusting students. Uh, you know, Trusting students to be kind, trusting students to do what they're supposed to be doing on the internet, and trusting them to not be distracted are huge things that we need to overcome in the classroom. Have you experienced problems with cyberbullying or other inappropriate internet use with students? Personally, no, thankfully. And that's because I've only ever taught first grade, and my students don't really have the time or the ability to cyberbully. They don't know how to use it well enough to be able to even get into trouble, because number one, they're only in first grade, and number two, they don't have access to technology outside of school. I run a tight ship in my classroom, and they're only allowed to use the apps that I basically put them in, and of course, I guided access them into it to not have those issues. But I do see that being a major issue in the upper grades, as well as students with more technology at their fingertips, like in their cell phones, Snapchat, and social media bullying like Facebook and Instagram. So I personally have not dealt with it, but I definitely can see this being an issue.